one here, they made it look like fake wainscoting to make it look wainscoted underneath. And then they put this wallpaper on. And at one end, here's this mantle. Now, what's really remarkable is when we found all this stuff, when we found this paper, I started trying to research what paper was available and can we get copies. Well, I found one of the leading wallpaper companies that do reproduction wallpaper, and lo and behold, the one pattern they had, we had a copy of. Of all the pineapple wallpaper that is around, they actually had the exact same one. The guy on the phone couldn't even believe it.
Is this still in print? Can people still get this?
Yes, that's it. This is in print. This is.
My gracious.
I've got a piece on the swath of
it. And when was this put up? This was put up.
So the date of the wallpaper that they believe they found it in a barrel box, some sort of box that was lined with this wallpaper in New Hampshire in 1830. And they believe it was printed in New York City. How it got down here in the backwoods of the Dutch Fork doesn't really show how strange it is, but it shows how interconnected the Dutch Fork was with the trade routes and trade all over the world. I mean, these people, so we believe this was put in the 1830s. In the way the patterns are, but it's astonishing. I mean, you can see the three leaves. The pink, of course, everybody knows red bleaches out quicker than anything, so that's why all the pinks are gone, and the greens have all turned brown. This upstairs was used as a smokehouse in the early 20th century. They smoked hams up there. So that's why the colors are so messed up. But this stuff here, I don't know if you see it, there it is.
Why did they put wall like the smokehouse?
Well, it wasn't a smokehouse, it was upstairs. They used it as a smokehouse later when it was abandoned. That's why it was all messed up. This was upstairs. What I wondered was, why did they put it upstairs in this expensive wallpaper and not in the downstairs parlor, which was strange.
Maybe they built the smoke rises, maybe, and they built fire down, or.
Well, no, the smokehouse has nothing to do with the wallpaper. It has nothing to do with the wallpaper. They just used it later. They used it later. I was saying that's why it's so tarnished, because they used it as a smokehouse in the 20th century. The folks did. It was just a support structure, but nobody was living in it then.
Where is this property located?
This property is located on Kibler's Bridge Road, named for the Kibler House, right across the road from the 18th hole of Mid-Carolina Golf Course. When you go on the frontage road, off of 773, past the golf course, and right when the road turns, it's there on the left. And the other thing that's so cool is in the corner downstairs, this is original boarding. You see where the shelves were. This is what was there. Dr. Jim Kibler found this in an outbuilding that Mr. Bill Carter of Carter and Holmes Orchids had taken it out of the Kibler cabin in the 60s and had it stored in his outbuilding by Carter and Holmes Orchids. And Jim Kibler came and bought it from him. Took it to Athens, and then this is it in my office. I'm holding it. Well, now we had it, but now he has it up in Mapleton. But it'll end up going back into the cabin. This wonderful piece, look at that. And it's all made with the same rose head nails.
Wow.
It's magnificent.
And that's 1700s? 17?
We think 1700s is what we think.
Wow.
But here's the questions. And this is the most strange and befuddling thing I have ever seen. And I've had the leading house forensics in the Southeast come and look at this. And no one has ever seen this before. All downstairs is framed. The second floor is logged on one part of it. On one part of it. the second floor, so when you're facing the front of the house, the lower floor, 2/3 is all framed and originally constructed and tied to the upstairs logs with rose head nails. And then the 1/3 on downstairs is log. Okay, so just hold on to that thought, because there's stuff here we still haven't been able to figure out, and it's fascinating, and it's kind of a window into how these people built things. And because there's so few left, when we see an anomaly like that, we really don't know how much of it was an anomaly. I mean, it might have been a common thing. This was just the only one left. But here's this. This is inside. So this is the downstairs parlor. Right here is right here is where the corner cupboard used to be, and you can see there used to be one over here too.
Wow.
This is the downstairs mantle. This is the upstairs mantle. You can see how different they are, but also notice the clapboard. This was all covered up years ago. Now, let's go forward. This is a picture of the cabin in 1984. All right? Notice the stone chimney and the brick, but notice the firebox up here is up here. This chimney doesn't even accommodate the firebox. So we know this chimney was added later. Now, here's another thing. Let's go and look at it, what it was like now. This is what it looks like now when I took off the siding. Unfortunately, the chimney was torn down in 1990. The people who had it tore off the chimney, and the people who were living in it, which were descendants, African American folks who were descended from the sharecroppers who had moved into it after it was a smokehouse, he wanted a new chimney, and Mr. Burley Bedenbaugh, who owned the property at the time, I don't know if anybody remembers Mr. Burley, who had the gas station there at I-26, he tore down the old chimney to build him a new one, and then he said, well, it's too expensive, I'm not going to worry about it, and the guy had to move out because he had no chimney anymore. But here's what I want you to see. You see that? Can you see this beam right here?
Yeah.
This was the original walk-in cooking hearth. Big, huge fireplace. So originally, this was a huge chimney. So we suspect original chimney went here and then up. You see those shoulder chimneys on old houses? That's what we believe was here. Okay? Now the mantle inside that looks like 1830s. It kind of has a look, just from my knowledge of forensics of how mantles were built, it looks like an 1830s mantle. The mantle upstairs is a lot older than it. Okay? So let's get a little closer. So here's a better look of the logs. So you see they cut these logs. These logs used to go all the way across. And here, see where the pegs are? There's your pegs, your wooden nails. There they are. They only used them for big timber things. So here's where the original hearth was, but all this was filled in for the smaller fireplace. And you can still see the smoke where the old cook thing burned, and you can still see smoke where it went through in the smaller fireplace. So they used it as a fireplace. Now, here's the other thing. Here, now notice on the other side, downstairs has no logs, upstairs has them. Look at this. You see the logs on the first floor? See how round? They're saddle notch, which is a German tradition. They're saddle notch, but there they are, round, 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 and then look at them. Narrow and square. Totally different. So that tells us this is a generation younger than this. Now, let's go. Oh, but I also want to show you the shed rooms, the front. You see where the mortise was? This porch, there was a porch here. It was filled in later. But this porch and the front porch were all built at the same time. And all that time when it was done, it was covered in that beadboard siding with those hand-wrought nails that says 18th century. Now, let's go into the property ownership. This is from our friend, Carl Nichols.
Yes,
He did a
Carl
wonderful
Nichols.
job. I was privileged to ride around with him all over the place, looking at what he did, and this is the plat that he showed, the original land grant to the property. That star is my star. That's mine. But this is 773, this is I-26, golf course is here now, but this was originally land granted to Margaret, we think, Priester, is who that is. We think that that was some silly English
The English trying to get the British.
Yeah.
Yes, what
It
the,
was. So,
what the
yeah,
British were
Beaton
not saying.
Ball's, Beaton Ball's got the same thing
Yeah.
with pit bag.
Yeah.
So anyway, so who was she? We have no idea. Then all of a sudden, Henry Seithman owns it. We suspect Henry Seithman was probably married to Margaret Priester.
Actually, I know who he was married to.
Who?
He actually married a Barbara Ann, a mayor, and he was a loyalist. He lost his land because he was in Charleston and went up to Nova Scotia. And on my Facebook site, I've got his ancestors. I got his descendants.
I want to see that.
No problem.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Henry Seithman shows up in the record. More info. It's great to have a club. And of the 250 acres, which is 250 acres, Henry Seithman sold 125 acres to John Fellers in 1765. So this went to John Fellers. This is the same John Fellers whose daughters married Henry Dominic. I don't know if y'all know that story of Henry Dominic going to get a wife and then came back and got a second wife after the first wife died, married his sister. That's John Fellers. So then we know in 1773 in April, William Halsell got it. Then in 1773 of May, only a month, Jacob Terror got it. So there was a lot of land speculation going on up here. And that's basically what this was. People getting on record, trying to get land. And William Halsell had it. Jacob Terror, he resides in Orangeburg District. In 1796, Frederick Terror got hold of it, and he resides in 96th District. Now, Frederick Terror did not reside in the Dutch Fork in Newberry County. We think he was over the river in what is now Saluda County or Edgefield. Okay, but he was in the 96th District. We believe Frederick is Jacob's son because he only got it for $1. Okay? Then, in 1804, John F. Kibler, the son of Johannes, the immigrant, got the property in 1804. That 125 acres. And Carl indicated that there. Now, let's go to the next one. So John Kibler had it. Well, let me say this. These dates do not line up with how this house is built. And this is the big question we have. How are we doing on time? Are we good?
Oh, we're good. Yeah.
Okay. We do
And I
not.
asked the file that's up there, Crims Creek is down here and up there.
What's that? Here's a branch of Crims Creek here. This is the other branch. It's a branch of Crims Creek.
Okay,
So this is the branch here, and this one runs into it.
okay.
And this is the branch. Anybody that's going on Kimbler's Bridge Road and turn left, and the little ford,
Yeah.
the little ford, creek ford, that's where this is. And that was the Barr property. The Barr settled there. And their house is still there too. So, if this house was built in the 18th century, then we would think maybe Jacob Terror built it. But here's the problem. When Jacob Terror left it to Frederick Terror, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, it specifically describes the property as wonderful water, great soil, timber, and it mentioned all the land part. It said nothing about a house. It was talking about it as if it was a unsettled piece of property, because it was acting like this is a great asset. Look at all the resources you have on it. If there had been a farm there for the past 30 years, there would be no huge timber on the place on 125 acres. It made no mention of a house. So even though it's only a hypothesis of mine, I can't prove it, I do not believe that house was there when Frederick Terr got it. I do not believe it was there. And many folks, I've had a lot of great discussions about this. Many folks think they think it was, but I do not believe it was there. I believe it was moved there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? John Kibler bought it in 1804. Now, it could be likely that John Kibler is the one that made the cabin look like it is now. It could be 1804, even though it's late. By 1804, most people were using a different type of nail. They were called a brad. A little tiny thin, little tiny nail. That was all machine made, actually. It was a new thing. They invented the machine in the 1790s, and it was starting to be very popular. But he might have used hand-wrought nails. They did have a blacksmith shop. They did have a mill. The Kiblers were very well off with the mill. But even if he did, there still shows the signs that there was an earlier cabin inside all of that predated 1804. So let's go. John Kibler passed away in 1829, and Nancy Kibler inherited 450 acres. John Kibler had 800 acres. So if you look at the property here, you see this dotted line? That is basically what is 773 now. This is what is Kibler's Bridge Road now. This square says dwelling house there. That corresponds exactly with where this house is. I don't know if anybody remembers, on the other side of Kibler's Bridge Road, back where the Hips had a garage, on that road that goes and dog legs up toward Pomeria, there was a house there that Edwin Dowd actually took down in the late 90s or early 2000s when he started his Hart Pine business. That is that house. So what happened is John separated out his property among his children. He had 800 acres, and he left his wife with 450. So in 1829, she had it. In 1837, she passed away, and William Kibler died. William Kibler inherited it. And then William Kibler died early, and in 1857, his son, John D.A. Kibler, picked it up at 17 years old. So he was sponsored by his uncle, but he was a young man at 17. So this is why many of our plantations started out as cabins. And if you go to many of them, you'll see there's cabins, and they added on as they prospered more. Well, I've always wondered, why didn't they add on if they had so much wealth when and stayed in this tiny little cabin? Because let me tell you, this is John D. Kibler's plantation in the 1860 census. He had 500 acres with 240 being improved. He had 1 horse, 6 mules, 7 milk cows, 14 cattle, 41 hogs, 700 bushels of corn, 85 bushels of wheat, 65 pounds of peas, 10 pounds of Irish potatoes, 50 pounds of sweet potatoes, 14 bales of cotton, and 33 slaves. In 1860, run out of that tiny little house. The only thing I could think of why they didn't expand was he was so young, and when he came of age to actually be able to invest in it, because he really didn't own it. His uncle controlled it until he became mature at 18. We know what happened in 1861. He was called off, and that stopped everything. So Yes, ma'am.
How do you did you get that from the Newberry County Courthouse, the plats that far back? Did you go back in the archives and get?
The plats are in John Kibler's estate at Newberry County Courthouse, that plat. That's where I got that
So
from.
that's what you-
This is on the census record that you get off of Ancestry.
Uh-huh.
Just dig in there and look. The agricultural statistics
Oh, wow.
are all there.
I
The
didn't
agricultural statistics are absolutely phenomenal to look
How,
through.
you're gonna have to show us how to get to that, because I would like to read that. I
Yeah.
didn't even know that they had agricultural statistics.
They got agricultural statistics.
Wow.
And you could go into the census, and it's not, it has the two different types. And one is property and one is personal, and the property. Now, the slave thing wasn't there. I had to get those off the slave schedules, which is another thing. But you look through there and you will see a very diverse economy in the Dutch Fork. These weren't monocultural cotton plantations, okay? These were very diverse places.
Off of Ancestry.com, I mean, that same.
That's where you
uh,
got it
That's where I got that
I
from.
see that a lot of times, I go back and I say, I hate that because I can't tell who was the sons and all that lived in the.
Well, on the Suns, all the Sun stuff I got just from the research Jim Kibler's already done. And Jim Kibler done a lot of research. And so, there we go.
And he was a moonshiner too, but had 700 bushels of corn.
Well, he had to feed all those cattle and hogs too.
It wasn't illegal.
And,
He didn't have
and
any
he had 33
chickens,
slaves to feed.
and he had no chickens.
Bootlegging was not illegal.
There's no chickens.
That's right.
I know it,
There's no chickens.
Yeah, I wouldn't know if chickens would have been. Yeah, they should have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never see chickens listed in the schedule.
So maybe they
that-
were not
Oh, he
counted.
had chickens, I'm
Yeah.
sure, but they just didn't list them. And so in that little cabin, total value of the personal and real property in 1860 totaled in excess of $46,000, well over $2.5 million a day.
Wow.
Most of that was in enslaved persons working the plantation. Okay?
Where were the slave houses?
Well, we don't know, but across the road is a ramshackle house where folks that are descended from the sharecroppers have added on to, and there's a tiny house in there, and I'm convinced that it's not a slave house because it's late 19th century, 1880s, 1890s, but it's built like a slave cabin. It was just one little room, was all it was with a fireplace. But it was built 1880s, 1890s. So, but they were around there somewhere. So then, what happened to the property was Jacob, John D.A. Kibler's uncle was Andrew Jackson Bedenbaugh, the other grandson of John Kibler, who started this in 1804. Andrew Jackson Bedenbaugh. He ended up being a huge landowner, and he bought up all these properties. And basically, his property is where Burley Bedenbaugh owned in the 1980s, and that was the intersection of I-26 and 773 was the center of Andrew Jackson Bedenbaugh's property. And when they put in, if y'all remember them putting in the industrial park, and they had to move the cemetery, if y'all remember, they moved the cemetery from there to St. Paul's. It was the Andrew Jackson Bedenbaugh Cemetery they moved. Okay? And that was on the opposite side of 773 from the courthouse. So the next record we have, we really don't know because Andrew Jackson owned it, and then his son Burley, and then his son Burley Jr., and then Miss Eleanor Bedenbaugh owned it, Burley's second sister. So it was just people and tenants living in it, and the last tenants that lived in it was John and Shakur Counts. This picture was taken in 1976. What's interesting is our Dutch Fork heritage and the tie to the African Americans that were here, that was enslaved by the Dutch Forkers, the familial connection. Their son was named David Housiel. Okay, so he had a Dutch Fork name. I was in negotiations with him and talking about getting the cabin and buying it from him, but he died. while we were talking. And so his daughter, Betty Ann, was able to pick up the talk with us, and she sold us the structure off of the property. The problem is, it's just, and this is her daughter, and the problem is, it's just 0.2 acres. We couldn't put a septic tank, we couldn't do anything with it, and we have to move it. So, and she's been wonderful, she donated it to us, and so now we are trying to figure out how to save it, and I've got to move it, and I need to do it this year. So we're gonna work on some ways to do that. I wanna go into one more property that we are working on, and it ties into this, the Jacob Bedenbaugh house. Anybody goes down 773, before you get to the golf course, this house is on the left. Okay? What makes this interesting and important, and our organization put this on the National Register. Jacob Bedenbaugh was Andrew Jackson Bedenbaugh's brother, but he was pushed out of the family. Why? Because he took up as a wife an enslaved woman in 1860 named Sarah, and he had 8 children by her. He sent every one of those children to college in the 1880s and 1890s. He was very dedicated to those children. And he actually, when the anti-miscegenation laws came into place in 1895, under Ben Pitchfork Tillman's new constitution, when it was outlawed, they actually took him to court for cohabitating with his wife, who happened to be black, and they lost in the state Supreme Court. So, because of that, the old kitchen house, and this is how it looks now, the old kitchen house that was behind the plantation house was turned into her apartment. So legally, she had to live in a separate house. So you can see the 1890 census says master of the house, Sarah, children. 1900 census, master of the house, single, children, Sarah, servant. And we got that as the only example of the anti-miscegenation laws in the state. And this is the current owner, Roger E. Thompson, descendant of Jacob and his wife, former enslaved woman Sarah Bedenbaugh, and my 5th cousin. So it's a fascinating journey to look at these places. They're more than just sticks and stacked up in pretty ways. They tell a story, they tell a fascinating story that if we don't save them, they will be lost and the stories will be lost. So we are an organization that is dedicated to doing this. So I welcome each and every one of you to go on our site. I have stuff here, and we love for you to be members and be involved so we can keep doing what we do, which is saving buildings. And do it as much as we can in the Dutch Fork as possible. And that's it. Thank y'all so much.
How about barns? Old barns, you interested in old barns?
Absolutely, especially so many of the log barns scattered about everywhere we are. The thing about barns, I mean, we prefer to try to save the site of the barn and the house and everything, and we really don't have many resources to be able to move barns or do anything, but yeah, we're definitely interested. In fact, on our ancestors, my brother owns what I believe is the Henry Dominic house. My brother's one that wrote the Dominic history, Boyd Bedenbaugh. Have you ever seen the big, thick Dominic history? And we own what I think is the Henry Dominic house. And behind it is one of the only log cantilever barns in the state. Logs this big, the core, and then on top, logs this big stick out over twice the length out, and the roof is tied into that with no outside support, all the way around it.
My wife owns a barn, and I don't know, have any idea whether it's 10, 40 years old or older, you know. It's just right down the road. And I haven't, it's half a mile from here, but I haven't been out there in years, 3 or 4 years.
Well,
And I
it's,
just thought maybe somebody could look at it and see if it's,
well, I'd love to look at it.
it might not be, I don't know.
I'd love to look at it, just to see, just so we can be
Yeah.
informed. Here are my cards. Let me give you.
So just right out there.
What, off of 76?
start, it's on, when you turn that picture. What's the name of that? St. Peter's Church.
Oh, St. Peter's Church Road, turn left.
Turn left on.
Oh, yeah, go out St. Peter's Church Road.
Yeah, and it's about, half a mile.
Oh, on the right, the barn back behind there. Yes. Is that your property?
My wife.
Your wife's property. I was there because it's trying to be sold. I went all inside that barn. That barn's wonderful. Yes. That barn's very good. What's that?
You think it's old?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think it's very old. I think it's pre-Civil War old.
This is on the right.
Yeah, where the road turns. The house is right there, and the barn's behind it, right? Is it the log barn?
No, it's not a log barn.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking the wrong one. If you go where at St. Peter's Road and it forks, there's like an outdoor store there. There's a little gray house for sale.
Yes.
Behind it
Oh.
is a pre-Civil War log barn.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay.
wonderful.
That was her, aunt,
Gotcha.
in the one you're talking
Yeah, yeah. That one, because unfortunately the Cease home, which is when you go down and you keep going straight and you get to the little mountain road, turn left, the pretty white house there with the stone chimney, the Ceases lived there. They had a magnificent log barn from the 1840s. And the guy couldn't sell the house, so he sold all the log barn off for scrap. So we lost it.
about. Well, we lost the house that was out there. My brother-in-law, he was, sick, really, but so he let some guy tear it down, or mess it up for $200.
Yeah.
I said, that's,
Yeah, it's sad. And that's what we try to keep from happening. So,
And there's the barn that's behind, where Rudy used to buy, it's right next to, Waffle House. The old Little Frick house. There's a barn behind there that's collapsing, but it's hand hewn, log bars, it's hand hewn. And I'd like to get a picture of that, just there's a picture.
so the house there that was the
Used to be a,
hardware store, the barn still back there?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Is it collapsed or?
The bottom has collapsed, so it's kind of like sitting on itself. But the rest of the
Logs,
logs are, I was
everything?
like,
Wow.
that needs to be moved. And there's another log barn that I was told that it was original log cabin, right near, why is my brain going blank? St. Jacobs.
The Roosters.
Reisters, yes.
Yeah.
And then, the road, I just know it's the road to the dump, okay? I think it's Paul Farmer Road, but I'm not real sure. But the Fricks on it, there's 3 hand-hewn log barns on that road.
Yeah. It was
I
very
mean,
common. And
there's-
it's really
there-
sad to see
there
all
more-
this.
There are more out there than you know.
Yeah.
You know, I go, ooh, barn, ooh, barn, ooh, barn.
There won't be
you know,
long.
yeah.
So, anyway, any other questions, thoughts?
Henry Sightman.
Yes.
Okay,
Send me what you got.
I'll read it out loud to you.
Okay.
DutchForkChapter.org and the Mayer family. We have family as Mayer. Barbara Mayer, born 1746, married Henry Sightman, born 1741 in Germany. She died in 1813, buried in Nova Scotia. Barbara Mayer had a colonial land grant on Camping Creek, which was sold by Barbara Mayer, alias Sightman, to Jacob Folk. Henry Sightman, a tailor, came to SC at age 16, settled on Crims Creek during the Revolutionary War. Sightman served with the Loyalist forces and left SC with the evacuation of British troops from Charleston and settled in Nova Scotia. And I was like, because when I wrote about this, I mentioned that I would like to meet some of Barbara Mayer's descendants and Henry Sightman's descendants, because they're Dutch Fork. Lo and behold, a year later, I get 4 messages from 4 different people, and 2 from Nova Scotia and 2 in Canada. I don't think they even know each other. They're descendants of Barbara Mayer and Henry Sightman.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And one of them follows the Facebook pretty strongly, but it has their kids here.
You know where they live?
Halifax?
No. I mean, before they moved, before the war.
No, it doesn't say.
And you didn't find any other land grants?
Oh, No, I haven't, but it said he had a colonial land grant on Camping Creek, which is in the Chapin area.
Well, it should be in
So,
Carl's book,
yeah,
in
it
Carl's
should be,
atlas,
yeah.
we should have it.
So
So I'll look
that's-
it up when I
yeah.
get home.
But
Let's see.
this is a little mystery, and since the Dutch Fork people went off, it's cool to see them coming back. The Dreer family, one of the Dreers went to Louisiana, and the husband and wife, mom and dad died, and left 3 or 4 orphan kids. I wrote about it, I looked it up. And someone descended from those 3 or 4 orphan kids contacted the Historical Society. I'm from the Dreer line, from Louisiana. I said, oh, I know, you're John Dreer. And he, so it's like I'm getting all these people that have Dutch Fork roots.
Well, what's fascinating to me,
It's amazing.
what's fascinating, because a lot of Dutch Forkers were loyalists. Micheal Bedenbaugh was a loyalist. He was in a loyalist jail at Fort Granby in 1781. But of course, they didn't leave. They stayed. So I'm fascinated by why some stayed, what it was, the condition. I guess they just swore an oath of loyalty, and they did. And I think most of them were respected for their viewpoints, even because they saw it as a sincere thing. I mean, there was the way Charleston and the aristocracy in Charleston treated the folks up here. It's very easy to understand why they rejected their revolution. Because for one, King George was Hanoverian, German, and they left their little peasant villages in Germany with no rights, and they here have stamp that they have land, and now these powdered wig dandies in Charleston are telling them their tea's being taxed, and they're up here carving a home out of the wilderness where they would not pay for their forts during the French and Indian War, and they were almost wiped out by the French and Indian War. They had nothing to say about it. They turned once Wymus and Tarleton showed their true colors and burned out people in their homes. Many of them did, but my Bedenbaugh didn't. But they moved to the Stony Hills, and that's where we were.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, complex, wonderful story.
It is, and and it's just neat finding Henry Siteman's and Barbara Mayer's descendants, because I typed in Henry Siteman genealogy, Halifax, Nova Scotia. They didn't know where Barbara came from. I'm like, I get where she came from. I was typing where she came from. I linked the link to it, and boom, hit send. I'm like, I can tell you exactly where she came from. She's Dutch Fork. So anyway.
Well, I tell you, the DNA stuff is wonderful to do too, just what it shows up.
And that's how I got contacted. She said, well, this explains why I have DNA cousins in the middle of South Carolina. I was like, yeah.
I know it shows all
And
the
I'm
areas.
one of them, because I'm a mayor. So, but anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yay! And this, we will meet in March. Don't have a speaker yet. I'm working on that, because it's home in February. But it'll be exciting and interesting anyway, so come back.
I'll just